All right. Well, I want to ask you a question. If at any point this week, maybe a day had passed or whatever, and you knew how many steps you had taken on one given day, raise your hand. If you know how many steps you've taken, if you're tracking your steps, how many? Several of you, right? It's kind of a new thing over the last couple of years, which we track our steps. And that highlights something about our society, I think. And it is kind of like this emphasis on distance traveled. What can we accomplish? What can we get done? How far can we go? Distance over direction, when really the teaching of the scriptures would have us emphasize direction over distance. And as we look at Genesis chapter 5, that I hope will become more evident for you and all of us as we consider this life that God has not just called the Israelites to then, but to his people today, to emphasize and live with a priority that shows that we want to be direction-oriented more than we're distance-focused. This is the emphasis of Genesis chapter 5, which if you had taken a look at the loop last Sunday, you saw that this was the text that we'd be looking at today. Hopefully you did some time to prepare, and you saw a bunch of names and thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. If you felt that, then you're not alone. I've felt the same thing. But as I've studied and prepared, it's been evident to me what God is intending to communicate to these wandering Israelites. If you're new here, I want to kind of bring you up to speed, and for the rest of us who are forgetful like me, I want to remind you of kind of what we've learned already. Why are we looking at Genesis in the first place? This is a series from Genesis 1 to 11 where we are really discovering how God was caring for people way back then. A people, ancient Israelites, who God had saved from slavery. He had secured them through his power, and he was sustaining them and promising them a future full of hope. And he's leading them into this so-called promised land, but they're somewhere in the middle. And in this middle place, God gives them this story so that they would know their roots and their shoots, where they had come from. Genesis 1 to 11 is known as the primeval history, like the history of humanity, essentially. Where did we all come from? But not just their roots, but their shoots. Where did they come from, and where is God intending to take them? Roots and shoots. They've learned several lessons thus far. They realize in Genesis chapter 1 that God alone is creator, that Elohim is creator. He is the maker of heaven and earth and all things, but he's not just a distant deity that creates things and sets it into motion. No, he has a personal name of Yahweh. This was introduced in Genesis chapter 2, and it speaks to his utmost holiness and his personal nature, and that when he creates, he also dwells among his creation. His desire for them is to flourish in his presence and under his reign, but they disobeyed. Adam and Eve would disobey. Sin would wreck absolutely everything. And the Israelites are beginning to grasp some of these concepts and realities for the very first time. And now, as they're reading Genesis 5, they're hearing Genesis 5. It would have been an oral culture. And as we approach it now, we find ourselves at a crossroads. There's a fork in the road. And as we approach Genesis chapter 5, I want us to think about, as we have made it a practice, to put ourselves in the shoes of these wandering Israelites. If you've been tracking with us now for a couple of weeks, you've worked through Genesis 1 through 4 with me, and we've been thinking, how do we put on the hat of the ancient Israelite? And as they're the original audience, we have to be asking, what was God's intended purpose for these people? If we're going to interpret the text appropriately, we have to ask that question first. So in light of that, I want to share that common question with you. Through this story, what point was God making for the wandering Israelites? And as we have been doing, you're going to take some time right now and try to answer this. Through this story, what point was he making for the wandering Israelites? Keep this question in mind. I want to prepare you. We're going to read Genesis 5, and then you'll answer it. So if you got a Bible, go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 5 with me. Does anyone need a Bible? Anyone want one to hold it in their hands? Raise your hand and make sure we get you one. Don't see any. Okay. Genesis chapter 5. This is what it says. Verse 1. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived after he fathered Kenan 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived after he fathered Jared 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch. Jared lived after he fathered Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord had cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 770 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This is Genesis chapter 5. And so what I want you to do is take a moment and ask this question. Through this story, what point was God making for the wandering Israelites? And this is a very convenient time for me to pause because I forgot something in my office. So I'm going to go get it, and you're going to work on this question. I'm not lying to you, and I'll be back. That's good? Okay. Here it is. You guys still working on that? Anybody need more time? Yeah, that was the first, wasn't it? That was kind of weird. I apologize. It is what it is. Don't be fooled by the suit. I'm just a latchkey kid from Martinsburg. All right, here's my attempt. Walking with God is our only hope for redemption. This is my attempt to summarize Genesis chapter 5. Walking with God is our only hope for redemption. Now, we could restate that a bunch of different ways. Maybe another would be our direction will only lead to hopelessness unless we live out our days for God and His purposes. Now, this is the big idea that I would like to propose to you and then prove it from the text over the next couple of minutes. So here we go. You'll remember that the Israelites are now at this fork in the road, as I've mentioned. They've just heard all of these things. They've kind of understood now that Adam disobeyed, the very first man, and sin into the world through his disobedience. Through one man, Adam, all would die. They've already discovered that from Adam would come another, Cain. Cain would then eventually father a man by the name of Lamech. Let's think about Adam. Adam would sin. He would confess his sin to God when God asked him, and he would do some blame shifting in the meantime, but God would issue a promise. His son Cain would come along, would kill his brother Abel, and when God would question him, just like he did his own father, Cain, he rejects it. He doesn't take ownership of it. Later on from Cain, a man by the name of Lamech would come. And Lamech, not only does he not confess, nor does he reject it, but he boasts in his sinfulness. So we see the direction of one line, right? This is the fork in the road. We see where Cain's line is gone. But now we look at Genesis 5, and they realize that there's another direction that we might go as a people. Adam, the same Adam, would have another son who would be celebrated by Eve, the mother of all living, and they would name him Seth. And from Seth would come a man, Enoch. And where Lamech was opposed to God, this other direction of Seth that would end in Enoch demonstrates a life that would be walking with God. And so where I would propose to you, we are very much a people focused on distance we can go. The Bible is causing us to slow down, not look so far ahead, instead think about where we are right now and make some directional changes. Direction over distance. If we change our direction over time, the distance will take care of itself. So God is approaching these people right here with this fork in the road, and he is forewarning them. They're about to go into the promised land where we've already discovered there's going to be established societies already that are opposed to God and his ways. They're going to be against his word. They're going to bring hardship, persecution. If you'll forsake the God that made you and follow us, then we'll let you in. But if not, then there's going to be some problems between us. And God is forewarning them. Why? To forearm them. He is preparing them for faithfulness. And he is giving what's needed for life and for godliness through his word, the same as what he does for his people today. And so over these verses, which kind of just seem, on the surface at least, like this crazy long list of names and death reigning and people, Methuselah, 969 years? Like, would anybody want that? Anyways, that's what this man got. So this text is really full of confusion and questions. But there's some realities here that God is intending to use to remind these Israelites of the promised redemption that he's already given them. These are the realities. I'll share them with you on the front end. And there's a progression that makes sense. First, we'll see that God has given us as people the ability to know him. All right? And our ability to know him then makes it possible for us to walk with him. And then walking with God by faith guarantees us redemption from evil. Walking with God is our only hope for redemption, and he gives us everything that we need in order to receive this. We can know him, we can walk with him, and by walking with him by faith, we can have security eternally and hope for today. So the way of Cain is obvious, I hope. We've already looked at that over a period of time, and we see that it leads to death. It looked really good, but there is a way that seems right to a man, and its end is death. That's the way of Cain. And bad news would come before the good news for the Israelites. And now they are faced with Genesis 5, and God it's as if he is looking at them through this story, and he's saying, all right, guys and gals, generations, what direction are you going to take? Verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, male and female. He created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. We read verses 1 and 2, and it's nothing new. This is already familiar. Why would he be doing this? Well, because he knows the nature of man. Like, we are forgetful people. We need to be reminded of essential truths. It's not like we check that box and then we move on, never to revisit it again. God knows that we are forgetful people. He reminds them from whom they came, why they came, and what he has equipped them with, and he's promised redemption. And in verses 1 and 2, the reality that he's emphasizing for those wandering Israelites then, but also for us today, is that God has given us the ability to know him. Now, among a group of people that have heard of the gospel, have this paradigm or this mindset of God, having lived in America, most of us for probably the majority, if not all of our lives, this is not much of a mind-blowing reality, but it would have been for the Israelites who had come from Mesopotamian background, ancient Egyptian background, that would have said that there are several gods, they're not personal, and you better do what you can to make them happy or else they're just going to punish you. But now, Genesis 5 is coming with this promise that I can know God. That's a game changer. I mean, there is no way to emphasize how significant this must have been. We can know him intimately. This is what I thought about. Maybe you've lived this before. I'm laying down in my bed at night, and I'm startled. This happened last night. One of my kids came in and wanted something. It's pitch black in our room. And without even having to open my eyes, I knew who it was. Or if I hadn't known, maybe they had gotten a little closer and I put my hands on them and I would have known. Like, I know my kids so well, I don't need to see them. I can just kind of make my way around in the dark and know, like, oh, that's Hattie. Or when I'm in the office here and I work with Jamie and Sid and Brandy and my door is open, I don't need to know who's coming by seeing their face. I know what their steps sound like. This is knowing people. The scent of those that are closest to us, good and bad. Cherie says that I have a scent in the morning. She knows that, unfortunately. I've been holding her hand for 20 years. Fits like a glove. There's no hand like it. I know her. Can we know God like this? How? That's what it's claiming. A couple of weeks ago, actually I think it was about a week and a half ago, I just want to share this with you. We had a pastoral visit. Now, normally when I say that, it's me going into one of your homes to sit with you and pray for you and encourage you, hear what God's doing in your life. But on this day, one of our pastors came to our home. Pastor Pat, I'm thankful for you, brother. And he sat with us and asked hard questions and cared for us deeply. And I'm so thankful. And I'm just going to put it out there. In our conversation, one of the things that became evident to him was that, I have let family devotion to kind of lack. Life takes over, you get busy, before you realize it, you're like, man, I've not really organized, sat down with my family and read the Bible together and talk about it. We're talking about spiritual things all the time, but in an organized way. Now, judge me, that's fine. But I get it. It's tough. So Pat comes and he just kind of encourages us to redirect. We ain't talking about distance at this point. We're just talking about directional changes. And it's a game changer. I'm thankful for that, brother. And the grace that he showed me, right, because you're like, well, of all people to be doing family worship consistently, it ought to be you, Pastor. I don't disagree. I'm a fallible dude. And I'm thankful that Pat came and encouraged us and exhorted us. And then he was like, hey, there's a book that I've been using in our home. Pastor Jamie actually told me about it. He says it's called More Than a Story. I'm like, oh, that seems familiar. I think I've got it on my shelf. Get the dust off of it real quick, Pat. And so we've been sitting around our table at dinner time. We finish up our meal. We sit around the table. I just crack it open, read a couple paragraphs. We just start having some conversation. Real simple. I think it's easy for us to create this mindset like, oh, it's got to be X, Y, and Z. It has to look like this. I mean, if your life is like mine, I got 4 kids. It's like a circus in there. Sometimes you just got to rein them in and try to have a brief conversation. Change the direction of that table talk, and you never know what God will do. So a couple days ago, we were sitting at the table, and we were talking about this reality, that God has given us the ability to know him. And verse 1 says, when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. And as we were reading just a couple of days ago, I looked at this book, and this is where we were. I want to read it with you. It says, God's most special creation is he created his most special creation in a very different way than he created everything else. He speaks, let there be light, let there be this, let there be this. He's speaking, but how does he make man? Somebody tell me. I didn't hear. Again, louder, please. He formed with his hands, breathed breath of life into him, and made him thus in the image. And the book goes on to say, man is different from all the rest of creation because man was made in God's image or likeness. What does that mean? I want to tell you. This is a fantastic conversation at our table. It says, man has a mind that can think, a heart that can feel, and a will to make choices and act on his decisions. God did this so that man could have a special relationship with him. A relationship very different from what the stars, the plants, and the animals have with God. And from there, we directionally have some conversations about spiritual things. And I'm thankful, brother, for your willingness to come and pastor us and redirect our focus. And God is allowing us even to have conversations like, what does it mean to actually know him? And so if you're in that boat, I want to be an encouragement to you. We like to give good books away. So if you got an elementary age kid or a middle school kid that you're not reading with, or you're like, hey, I want to start reading with, I'm happy to give this book away. Does somebody want to take it? Okay, Jesse, please come get it. Hand shot up. It's a great book. So y'all bought that, by the way. So Jesse, you've been blessed by your church family today. We can know God. But how do we know him? This kind of feels like this pie in the sky idea, but how do we actually know him? Now, there's this difference between what theologians refer to as general revelation and special revelation. Romans chapter 1, won't get into it, but essentially it says that we can perceive, recognize, understand that there is a creator just by looking at creation. And we can perceive, understand that he has divine attributes. But yet, in our own sinfulness, we tend to reject him. But just in general revelation alone, we have the ability to know of a God. But there's no saving knowledge in looking at a tree and realizing, wow, or a bird, or like eyebrows. That doesn't save us. That's just general knowledge, revelation that God has given that points to a creator. But then there is special revelation, where Paul says in Romans 10 in the same letter, well, how do we know God? We must hear the word. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing through the words of Christ. This is special revelation. This is exactly the type of revelation that Seth and his line would have had access to in the same way that Cain and his line had access to. Romans 1 says that because we have access to just general revelation, we are without excuse. So then how much more are we in trouble when we have access to the very words of God and we decide to reject them? We are without excuse. We're at a crossroads. What would come of it all? I just wonder, as you think about this, have you been given the companionship of God through repentance and faith? This is the point of special revelation, that God sent his son, Jesus, to die on our behalf, to cover our sin, our shame, and our guilt, and that God rose Jesus from the dead, that whoever would follow him would be given life and companionship with a personal God that we can deeply know. Have you been given that companionship through repentance and faith? Being made in the image of God and likeness of God allows us to hear his word and respond to it with a mind that can think, a heart that can feel, and a will to decide what are we going to do about this. So I just want to ask you, what role does the Bible have in setting the direction of your life? Our directional compass is being changed by all kinds of things, but the Bible ought to be primary in our lives. It has to be that which we think through, we see our lives through. What role does the Bible have in setting the direction of your life? The Israelites, just like us, now had the ability to know God. Cain knew God, Seth knew God. Both had inherited Adam's sin, but there's a directional change. There's a difference in the direction, and the distance would take care of itself. We saw where Cain ended up. Lots of good things, even, I would say. You think about the distance that would have taken place in Cain's line. Societies would have birthed the advancement of materials and war and homemaking. Like, they had gone the distance. And what did it leave them with? It left them with a desire for more. So what direction then would Seth's line go? Would they end up like Cain's? A few generations would pass and Seth would have his answer. Verse 22, if you've got it, take a look. Genesis chapter 5, verse 22, it says, Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. In an oral culture, in a poetic type style of communication, there's patterns for the sake of memorization, so that when there is a break in a pattern, it really gets the attention of the hearer. This person fathered this person, he died. This person fathered this person, he died. Enoch walked with God, and he was not. What? Like, that's a break. Why? What happened? What realities is God revealing through Enoch's story? It's this, that our ability to know God makes it possible to walk with him. The next step. It's possible for us not just to know of God, but to know him intimately and to walk with him. Now, the thing that I thought about as I was preparing to share with you is that idea of like a 3 a.m. friend. Like, it hits the fan in the middle of the night, and who are you going to call? If you've got a 3 a.m. friend, raise your hand. Like, I thank God for that. But I also agree by the reality that there are a lot of hands that weren't raised. God's given us access to 3 a.m. friends in this church family. I tend to call them generationally my ride or die, Maybe you know that reference as well. It's that it's not just that you know them and then you walk with them. You get to know them as you walk with them. It is a process, a continual process. God and Enoch, this is how they walk together. This is the intimate knowledge they had of one another. As Enoch would grow to know more of God, he would walk with God through life. But there's some differences here that I want to highlight so that we can truly understand what is the point that is being made for these Israelites. Sure, Enoch walked with him, but maybe it kind of brings to mind different types of phrases that we find in the Old Testament. So-and-so may be referred to as somebody that walked before God. So-and-so may have been referred to somebody that walked after God. Is that the same thing as walking with God? Consider this, because as you're reading the Bible, you're going to come across these phrases. They're worlds apart, all good things. Walking before God would be one who is morally blameless. One who's walking after God demonstrates a sort of ethical conduct that would be honoring the one he's following. But to walk with God, this phrase was only attached with Enoch and Noah. And it referred to a close personal communion. One who was not just before him, morally pure, behind him, following his statutes, but one who was beside God, walking at his side, who knew him intimately. Our ability to know God makes it possible to do this. I want you to think about this text again in that terms of like window and mirror type way. This allows us to look through the text and understand life and death and humanity, the purposes that God has for them and for us today, but it also should serve as a mirror. We hold it before us and we allow it by the power of the Spirit to inspect us. I want you to ask yourself, as you're looking in the mirror, beloved, what direction are you walking? With whom are you walking? Does your life fit the description of one who is in the footsteps of Cain and Lamech or Seth and Enoch? This is how we move beyond like, oh, that's interesting information, to this is life transformation. We allow the text to read us as the Spirit searches us, and then we learn to just take the next step in faithfulness. What is your next step? I don't really know what that is. We all have different steps to take. I know what mine is. I know what the Spirit's kind of urging me to think through and do, but I don't know what it is for you. But would you take time and ask the Lord, like, I want to walk in this direction that honors you. You can change. By the power of God, you can change. In the community of his people, by the power of the Spirit, living according to the Word, you, beloved, can change. I don't know what direction you have been walking, but you're right here, right now. And by his grace, you can make a conscious decision to walk in a different direction. What direction is it going to be? Maybe it's just learning how to pray and read the Bible. That would be a great next step. Starting next Sunday, I'm personally teaching a class on spiritual disciplines, holy habits, call them whatever you want. How do we commune with the Lord in prayer and Bible reading? I'd love for you to come and be a part of that and let me help you in taking the next step. Whatever that next step is, that is always, always, always the most important one. We're not talking distance here, friends. We're talking direction. You change the course of your life. You do the hard work of following Jesus day by day by day, having been saved by grace, but living with grit, knowing the enemy is crafty. He's going to throw us off course. But every day I'm deciding I'm walking in the direction of Jesus. I want to follow the path of Seth. I want to walk with God like Enoch did. Take the next step, beloved. It's the most important one. This is direction over distance. One man highlighted a reality that I thought helpfully illustrated this. He recognized that when a plane is sitting on the runway in Los Angeles, so if you're thinking about the United States, that's like far west, California. And if you're intending to fly to New York City, the nose is pointing east toward where we are. But if the pilot miscalculates and he tilts the nose of the plane just 3.5 degrees south, by the time he gets across the country, he's not going to end up in New York City. He's going to end up way below in Washington, D.C. You change the direction, the distance is going to take care of itself. So what directional changes do you need to make? What directional changes would these Israelites be forced to think about and consider? Do we want to walk the way of Cain, or do we want to walk the way of Seth? Well, what would come of it? Verse 28, take a look. Genesis chapter 5, verse 28. When Lamech had lived 182 years, this is a different Lamech, by the way, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord had cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. We can know God and we can walk with him. And as we're reading the text, there are three whats that we should ask. What? Now what? So what? So what is the reality that God is revealing. Walking with God guarantees our redemption from evil. Not just for those Israelites then who would trust God's word and live by faith, but for us today who hear the good news of the gospel and we say, man, I don't really know how to follow him when I've got all this mess behind me. But the reality is he's just calling us to take the next step in a directional place where God is going to be honored. And we're saying, like, I'm just going to live by faith. Enoch didn't live. It said he walked with God. Look at the difference between how Enoch is described. Enoch didn't die. God took him. That's the kind of man that I want to be. I don't want to be a man that's just mere living. I want to be a man that's walking with the Lord. Don't you want that too? And you think about this. When Enoch was taken, I don't know what that looked like. It was probably trippy and well beyond anything Hollywood could ever do today. Like, he was there, now he's gone. Where'd Enoch go? Right? It's like mind-blowing. And then these old boys are living for hundreds of years. There are generations. There is time, hundreds of years to talk about what happened with Enoch when he walked with God. And what do you think that did in the hearts of the rest of the Israelites? They said, that's what I want. They see the crossroads. I can go the way of Cain, and I can long for more. Or I can walk the path of Seth by faith, and I can walk with God and be guaranteed freedom from sin, redemption from evil. Enoch didn't live. He walked with God. May that be the case for us as well. The generations would speak of his work among us, centuries to reflect and to hope for redemption. Redemption from what? Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Go ahead and turn there if you've got a Bible. This was the ultimate promise that God would give to humanity as he was cursing the serpent. Genesis 3:15. God says, I will put enmity between you, Satan, and the woman, humanity, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Of course, we know now that this is speaking not of Seth. It's not talking of Seth's descendant, Lamech, or that of or Enoch, or even of the one that would come next, named Noah. It's talking of the one who would be the Messiah, the one that they would long for, Jesus would come onto the scene, and he would be the one to finally crush the head of the enemy through his death and resurrection. And now whoever follows him, whoever walks with God, is guaranteed redemption from evil, not because we've earned it, not because we deserve it, but because we've walked with God by faith. Israel, God is looking at them saying, be redeemed by the way of Cain, by going in the direction of Seth. They're at this crossroads. Which direction will they move forward in? I just want to make a note real quick about these genealogies. It's pretty fascinating. Lamech, from Cain's descension, was the seventh in Cainite genealogy. Cain, generations would come. The seventh was Lamech. We know what came of him, boasting in his evil. Seth, his line, was also recorded in Genesis chapter 5. And who do you think was the seventh in his line? It was Enoch. And God is intending to create this beautiful poetic picture of these eternal antitheses, that there is heaven and hell represented. There's exponential death and there is unbounded life. The direction of Seth is to walk with God and to know as his eternal reward, redemption. To walk the way of Cain is to oppose God in his ways and to face the punishment that we would rightly deserve. This is the hope of Genesis chapter 5. And through Seth, Noah would come. Verse 28, Lamech had lived 182 years, and he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord had cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Later on in 2024, we'll begin to look at Noah's life and story. We'll realize that the human race was all wiped out, except for Noah and his family. Why? Because he followed in the footsteps of Enoch, and he was blameless, and he walked with the Lord. That too can be us. Blameless is not the same as faultless. Faultless describes none of us because we are all with fault. Blameless is one who recognizes their fault and confesses it to God and follows him by faith. Noah was that man. So as we kind of wrap things up, I want to hold that mirror up in front of you again. Rather, I'd like for you to willingly do it yourself, if you'd be so bold, and stand at the same crossroads that those Israelites were at then, and here we are. Cain is going to go this way. Seth is going this way. What direction am I going to live? I want you to look at where you are right now. Where were you a year ago? 6 months ago? Are you closer to Jesus today than you were then? What direction have you gone? Was there ever a time in your life where your love for God was hotter than what it is right now? Are you willing to make that course correction again and walk in that direction? What direction are you facing now? In 6 months, will your decisions and priorities today lead you in a God-honoring direction, or will you look back again with dread and disappointment? What changes is the Spirit pushing you to make that will lead you closer to Him moving forward? We're talking direction over distance. So as we prepare to sing, I just want you to stop and sit and think. What is my next step? Spirit of God, search me. Tell me, what is my next step? Maybe it's believing upon the Lord Jesus Christ for the first time. Or maybe you've been walking with Him for a while and you kind of jumped off the trail and He's calling you back. Take the next step. What is it? Tell somebody about it. Be faithful. We'll stand and we'll sing in a moment.